at this point. With that being said, let's get things started here. Today's webinar is entitled DevOps Demands Better Data Access, and as I mentioned, it is sponsored by Veritas. Today's presenters are, if we can move to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So we're lucky to have two people on our panel today. First is Anthony Cuisimano, who's a software engineer and a Scrum Master. You could read his bio here, but Anthony will be presenting, along with Alex Brown, who is a product manager, and as he says, don't hold that against him. Alex has over 15 years of experience in the IT industry, and this should be, I listened in on the presentation, it should be a very interesting one. With that being said, I'd like to turn things over to both Alex and Anthony. Are you there?
We're here. Hi, Alan. Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay, let's kick it over to you. And again, questions go in the question section, folks, and we will get to them at the conclusion of today's webinar.
Great stuff. Thank you. So with that, welcome everyone. Thank you for spending a bit of time with us. I'd like to make a promise on the outset here. I'd like to just take 20 minutes of your time, and that's all. This is just going to take 20 minutes, so that's all I'm asking for your attention. I know it's difficult to sit through hour-long webcasts often, so we purposely kept this kind of down to a reasonable time, so hopefully we can get the pertinent information over to you. So hopefully that's a time period which is good for you and means you can pay full attention to us. And what we'd like to talk about actually is data access. And so let me explain what I mean by data access, and specifically what I mean by data access in relation to the world of DevOps, because of course that's why we're here. And so when I talk about data access, like we access data every day personally, but also professionally, there are parts of organizations who struggle with this accessing data they need. And now Anthony is representative of a demographic of certain people we know do struggle with data access. And that is, how do organizations of any size give people the data they need to do their jobs? So if you're a software developer like Anthony and his team, how do you gain access to a production data set to test your code or to do functional performance testing, testing your own description actually? How do you request access to that data? And then how does the business respond to that access request without jeopardizing its tier one production operations? So in short, almost a classic kind of tug of war between the change function of an organization, the application development teams, and the run function of the operations teams who are managing the systems. So with that, Anthony, can you talk a little bit about the bottlenecks that you experience in this kind of area as a software developer and as a Scrum Master?
Absolutely, Alex. So the first of our major bottlenecks that we run into every day as software engineers is quality. And quality can be something like, we can talk to it in a lot of different areas. One is when we need data, how reliable is it? Because the time it takes to get our data, when we request a database or a VM or an environment, the time it takes to get it is crucial in terms of its quality and its reliability. If it takes us a week to get something spun up that we can use, it's no longer useful. Like it's a week in software engineering, it's already irrelevant. It's already obsolete. Another huge piece of quality that we have to keep our eye on is the data that we requested. Is it accurate? Is it reliable? Is it from a backup that came? Was the backup that we pulled the data from a good backup? We know that we have access to it, but just because we have access, it doesn't mean that it's actually what we're looking for, what we need. And a big thing that we run into a lot is the time lock. We need to know how long it's going to take to get access to what we need to do our jobs. So one of the big things is when we need a test and dev environment set up, we have to go request it from a virtual administrator. These admins, they could take a week, 2 weeks of turnaround time just to get access to a virtual environment to test on. Another big time crunch is getting code checked into our CI/CD pipeline. If we want to submit something, it could take hours or days if we're locked into spinning up a new pipeline to submit something to.
Gotcha. Okay. So the data quality is a struggle. It sounds like on three levels. You've got the time to actually acquire the data in the first place. you've got the concern over how up-to-date the data is with regards to being, as up-to-date as possible. Then you've also got concerns over data integrity and is it any good to me when I get my hands on it?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so when data is acquired into your development environments, I assume you have various development environments, have you any idea kind of how many copies of production data are kind of like sprawled across those environments? Because I hear horror stories all the time of 10, 20, 50, even 90 to 100 I heard recently, 90 copies of any given database being replicated, physically replicated to development environments all over the place. Are you looking at a similar set of sprawl?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in those situations, you've got storage as a factor. You might not even be able to get access to what you need until more storage clears up. You might not have enough virtual space to get an environment provisioned because you've ran out. So it is definitely a risk factor.
And would you say that it's also perhaps different data types concern as well? Because obviously you talk about databases, but I presume there are other kind of objects which you request. I would assume virtual environments and such. You must have similar problems in acquiring production ready versions of those guys as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anytime that we need to test our product that we're developing, we need to stand up an entire environment that currently consists of 7 different nodes. And if we don't have the bandwidth or the storage space to do this, we can't test our code and we can't ensure that it's ready to be deployed and given to customers.
Actually, that's a good one. So I know you've been working on CI/CD pipeline recently, trying to get a continuous delivery model in place. Can you talk about how this kind of lack of agility affects that piece as well, the check-in and the time to get code out?
Absolutely. So we've been dealing with the problem of having a major bottleneck in our CI/CD, in that everything we check in goes through a CI/CD pipeline. Currently, we're stuck with just one pipeline that 140 developers have to get through. But in virtualizing this, we can spin up numerous pipelines that developers can get access to instantly or relatively quickly. So we no longer have one bottleneck, but have opened up numerous ways for people to get their code checked into the repository.
Got it. Great. Okay, that definitely helps frame the problem, I would have thought. Actually, and while we're here, could you just kind of talk us through a specific example of the process that we use today to try and acquire data into your development environments?
Absolutely. So the first thing we need to do when we actually need to test something against data is request it from a data admin. This could be an Oracle backup admin or a virtual admin. We have to send a request to somebody, and it's going to take time just for them to respond to our initial request. In our case, we want to request some Oracle test data. They're going to have to get an environment spun up to actually put that data into. So they request from a virtual admin, who has to request from a storage admin to get space carved out to stand up machines. So it's request upon request upon request. And then when we finally get the space set up that we need to put the data into, the admin then can prepare the data to give to us. Once that's prepared, we get it back and we can finally run our test and development against it. But this generally takes weeks of time. So we run out of the bandwidth we needed to do the initial task we were set to accomplish. The problem, as you've mentioned in your slides, is we run out of space very quickly because people make request upon request upon request and they don't get it instantly. So the requests pile up. You run out of storage. There's tons of human turnaround time, and that always introduces lag and delay. Another big problem is that we're doing things the exact same way, everything is done the exact same way every time. So we know there's a bottleneck, but we don't do anything about it to fix it.
Yep, that sounds quite familiar. I know that plenty of people I've spoken with have a very similar set of problems. And in fact, the problem is not the issue itself, the bottleneck itself. It's more the implication to whatever you're doing, developing code or whatever that may be. It's those implications and impacts which are really impacting the business or ability to do business. So could you talk a little bit about the kind of implications to you and your team as you experience these bottlenecks?
Absolutely. So in losing time, we can't get the code we need out to the customers fast enough. We're currently in an agile process. We want to develop features and functionality quickly to get it in front of our customers so they can tell us whether or not they like what we've done. With this current process, the way we're constantly waiting for human turnaround, we can't get code in front of them fast enough to know if we're actually building the right thing. So we're slowed down, and the fact that we're slowed down means that we can't get things out fast enough, which costs us more money. We're just spending time waiting around for data or environments or just to be able to check in our code, and this costs us a ton of money, and it also impacts our quality because by the time we finally get what we need, we're just in a mad rush to actually develop what we need to develop or test what we need to test, and we get sloppy.
So actually, on that point then, would you say that that some people take shortcuts to acquire data sets that perhaps either via a back channel or something else because they're so annoyed and just annoyed by the cumbersome process they're forced down?
Absolutely. I know that one of our big risks is that people will not decommission machines that they've gotten access to, or they'll hold on to data that's old and just use it over and over again, even though it's not necessarily relevant, but it's what they have access to at the time being. So you might be running tests, you might be developing against something that's old and obsolete.
Got it. Okay, great. So I think with that, let's pause and let's ask the audience to see if they kind of have a similar set of problems. So Alan, over to you for the first poll.
Sure. So our first poll question today. Which of the following are the biggest bottlenecks you face in getting data into a development environment? And we ask that you select just one. Time to complete the request, the cost of completing the request, complexity, quality of the request is poor, or risk due to data sets containing sensitive private data. And I know it might be a little complicated. Just pick one. But we'll close voting off here in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see what our answers are. Well, the big winner was time to complete the request. And probably to be expected, roughly half of the respondents chose that, with quality of the request and risk to data sets, I guess, in second and third. Don't know if that's what you fellas were expecting, but that's what it showed.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that reinforces a lot of what we hear in the research we performed. Talking with Anthony and his peers and the like. Time is a big problem because in the eyes of the people who are requesting the data, they don't see a lot of the operations going on to serve the request. They're just sitting there on their hands waiting for the request to be processed. And so it is mainly a time element to them. The people who are running the operations to try and get the admin spun up and get them doing the work, they're going to suffer from complexity and cost problems as a result. So time really is a big thing, and that's the problem here, time to access data. So if we can flip back to the slides, then I just want to kind of talk about, thank you, I just want to talk about excuse me. So let's talk about how this kind of matches the dynamic that we've seen in that, as I say, 90% of the people I've spoken with about this particular problem, they replicate the flow that Anthony has already been through with his data request or data refresh request. They have a similar set of problems and concerns over, in the eyes of the developers, it's just invisible work that happens, but it takes an awful long time to happen. And it's always the same. It never gets any better. And so if it's a week today, it's a week next week as well. And that's time consuming for everybody. It's expensive. And so there's lots of people who are doing this repeatedly within organizations. And so that's the 90%, and that seems to agree with the large part of the audience. So what are the 10% doing? And so are they just kind of living in denial and just assuming that it's all fine? I don't think so. I think the 10% are probably realists in that they recognize this problem, and they either are implementing or have implemented a solution which can help with that provisioning process, i.e. getting that person that access to that data in a much faster manner, and in which case you eliminate the time penalty. And that's really where we want to talk with you about as we move through this presentation now. We want to talk to you about data virtualization. Before we do that though, I just want to ask 2 additional questions just to frame the next part of the conversation. So Alan, back to you if possible.
Right here. Our next question is, what type of data do you most frequently have to copy to application development environments? Structured, sort of database data, unstructured files and file systems, virtual infrastructure, or maybe other. I don't know if people can specify what the other is, but in any event, if you can vote here, and we'll close voting off in just 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And our results show, well, I would have suspected this, almost 3/4 of people are moving structured database kind of data over.
Yep.
Alex, Anthony,
Again,
I guess to be expected.
That matches perfectly not only our own stresses and strains, but again, the research we've done shows a very similar set of poll results. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, let's go back to slides. Oh, do we want to do the next question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So our third question. On average, how long does it typically take you to get production data sets into a development environment? Less than 1 day, between 1 and 3 days, up to a week, or longer than a week? Yeah, I've lived through these in my life. Interested to see what people will say. We'll just
what would you say, Alan,
voting
just out of interest?
You know what? Unfortunately, I was longer than a week for a long time, but in today's environments, I hope we're going to see it's much better than that. And it is. That's the good news. So 43%, almost half, say between 1 and 3 days, and 21% say less than 1 day. So if we add those together, almost 2/3 are 3 days or less.
3 days or less. Great. Thank you. So if we could flip back.
Yep.
So that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because we're talking about structured data here, and structured data typically, particularly if we're talking about things like Oracle, DB2, Sybase, or whatever, these are big databases. And so these big databases not only consume lots of storage, but they take a long time to copy around. So the replication event itself will probably take many, many hours to complete. So notwithstanding that entirely matches our expectations of some of the stresses that you guys are experiencing, and 1 to 3 days seems to be a pretty popular number. And so let's talk a little
Alex,
bit about data virtualization.
If I could just, okay, I was going to ask you because I didn't see the slides. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. So let's talk about data virtualization and why data virtualization is kind of it's not a promise to resolve this problem, but it's a promise to get you on the right path to resolving a lot of the bottlenecks that can occur with that data access request. And so you have a need to access a database, let's say an Oracle database. It's a big database, or perhaps it's a SQL database. It might be small, but your access request ultimately hinges on you knowing some items about that data. And so you might not know who owns it, or whether it contains private information, or whether it's going to be a complex process. And so you submit a ticket, and then someone else has to care about these things. They have to care about all of the aspects related to that data. And so the promise of data virtualization is that it removes the need for you as the data consumer to really know or care about these things, in that you just care about accessing that information, not how do I make that happen. And so all the things about who owns it, how do I get access, who does the work, how long will it take, they're not things you really should have to care about as the data consumer. That's someone else's worry. And so if we can get to the point where we give you self-service capability to actually provision your own access to data under your own steam, we're actually cutting out all those bottlenecks, and you can move on to your next bottleneck, because there will be another bottleneck. And as I said, this is not the be-all and end-all, but this is actually moving the bottleneck forward now to say, well, now let's attack that next problem. And so with that, we'd like to talk about the reason we're here, and that's we'd like to introduce a new solution from Veritas, and it's called Veritas Velocity. So Velocity is actually trying to get to the point where we're making data virtualization a reality and a commodity within your organization, in that we want to give people like Anthony and his team the ability to serve themselves with virtual copies of data. And a virtual copy is essentially based on real data, but it's your copy, and it's very easy to get to. It's completely under your control, and it's your private copy of that information. And so an application developer, much like Anthony's team, you don't wait for IT operations to copy from A to B to C and prepare it and mask it and get permissions right. You log in, you find the database you're interested in, you provision it, and you access it there and then. And it takes minutes, 10 minutes maximum for a big database, but it takes a very small amount of time compared to the 1 to 3 days that we know it takes today to move that data around the organization. And so this virtualization layer is key to how these copies are served up in this kind of space-efficient format. So let me talk a little bit about how this hangs together from a big 10,000-foot view. So Velocity is an appliance, and it's either available as a virtual appliance. You can install it into your virtual environment, or you can purchase a physical appliance from us, and essentially it just captures data. Now, the nice thing about this is you can capture data directly from source. So we may be talking about Oracle databases. You can use RMAN to populate the appliance via an RMAN dump or whatever makes sense. But equally, you can take advantage of a net backup infrastructure you're perhaps already using to back up your Oracle databases or whatever else, and actually make better use of that backup data. And so now, if you're backing up Oracle Internet Backup, you can use that for not only a restore point now, but you can actually use that same information to seed information into Velocity and to make it available. And that's the big kicker here, is the Velocity will then expose that data that's been ingested as virtual provisionable copies. And developers, much like Anthony and his team, can come in and spin up and very quickly access virtual copies of that data for any number of given use cases that they're having to work on at that point in time. And so if we kind of dive into the details here, it looks something like this, and you have to excuse the kind of simplicity of the graphics here, but I think it highlights the point in that let's see data coming in. And so we're acquiring data now. Data's being seeded. So in this case, we're acquiring VM data. We're acquiring both SQL and Oracle data as well, because databases are a big part of our our access problem. And so as that comes in, it will consume storage within the appliance. Now, the nice thing here is that now we have an application developer who perhaps works on Anthony's team, Joe, and he needs to access a recently backed up Oracle database. And so he logs into Velocity and he'll find and search for databases. Using RBAC, we can actually restrict what he sees. He can find that database, and if he's been given permissions, he can request something called a sandbox gets created. And that sandbox contains all of the files necessary to mount that database into his Oracle host and to run it directly from Oracle storage, from Velocity storage. Now, as Joe accesses that data, he doesn't get a physical copy, he gets a virtual copy, so it's immediately space efficient. The only time we actually use storage, we consume storage, is when Joe starts changing rows and tables within that database, and then we store that as deltas on top of the original files, which means that that's his private change files, the private deltas. And so you can use, in this case, he's changed 2 terabytes worth of information inside of a much larger database. And so where it gets even better is Joe can now share that with the rest of his team and say, hey, I've prepared a database for you, perhaps I've performed masking, or I've updated or upgraded the latest version. Now come and access this virtual copy, and everyone else can spin up a virtual copy of that same virtual database. And again, it's their private sandboxes, so no one else can interfere with each other. So they're all doing tests against that data set. And again, space-efficient copies. So rather than shifting that 30 terabyte database around, we're just tracking the change blocks against the original. Now, that's all well for the application teams, but there are also benefits to operationally actually maintain the databases, because we know there are environmental pressures behind just keeping these databases up and running and tracking them. And so what's nice about this model is actually the databases are not only space efficient, but they're under management. And so once they've exceeded their useful time and they need to expire, then they can be removed and thrown away, and they're entirely disposable. And it doesn't affect the underlying data. And so if that underlying data is data from your backup or from your original system, then that never changes. It's just the deltas on top that we track as the change blocks. So if I can, Anthony, just to finish off your story, I know that we built this for ourselves, and actually we're looking to build it for our customers as well. Can you talk about how data refresh has actually been transformed as a result of using Velocity?
Absolutely. So as you just showed in your example, the way it works now is if we need data, we simply log in, we request the data we need from the application, and we get the data we need in a matter of minutes to an hour, depending on how big the data is. But it's self-service. We have full access to everything, and all the access has been determined beforehand by administrators. So it's not even like we're getting into things we shouldn't be. It's all okay. It's all kosher and good. So we get it quickly, we get it effectively, and it's in our hands. It's in our control. We can do what we want with it.
Very good. And I think with that, what we'd like to do is show you a quick glimpse of the UI of Velocity, just to give you a feel for how it looks. And Anthony, if you can you just give us a quick talk track over this very quick video?
Absolutely. So what you're going to see here is someone is going to go ahead and provision a new sandbox. They pick one of the data sets that they want to deploy from. So here we've selected the HR employee database. And it's over.
Sorry. Excuse me. Yeah, that's my fault. Technical problem.
That's all right. So they selected the HR employee database. They get the point in time they want, so that's what the little calendar and the sliders get. So they get the exact moment in time that they want to deploy this database from. They give it a new name and a description, and they say where they want the data to go, hit create, and they're off. And that's all they have to do. And in a matter of minutes to an hour, they will have the data they need to test against.
And I guess as an administrator, I can come in now and get a view of all the sandboxes that have been created, and including things like last access times, so I can figure out who's using what and which, which kind of databases can be removed.
Absolutely.
All right, very good. Thank you. Great stuff. So with that, I'm keeping to my promise. This is rather very at the end now. So 20 minutes is nearly up. So why are we here? We'd actually like to invite everyone on this webcast to consider being an early adopter of Velocity. And so Velocity actually is not available right now. It's in a beta period, and we're just approaching what we're calling an early release, in that we want to get on board the right kind of customers who are interested in the technology, have the problem, and would like to help us shape the product. And so if you looked at this webcast and seen some of the problems that you recognize internally for yourself, and would like to get in touch with us to consider being an early adopter of the solution, I should add, we're not planning on charging for it. This early adopter program will be entirely free of any cost. What we just ask for is your time in helping us shape this to being the kind of product that would transform your DevOps capability for serving data to application teams. And with that, rapid ROI is easy when something's for free. It's just a time element. So if you would like or recognize any of these problems, if you would like to get in touch with us, we would love to hear from you, even just to talk about the solution. Then please email us at team.velocity@veritas.com, and we'll get right back to you, and we'd love to have a chat. So with that, thank you for listening, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. That was wrapped up on time, guys. Very impressive. As I mentioned earlier to our audience, if anyone has any questions around this, you can type them right into the question section. You can, and we'll get them to our thing. So we've got one already, actually. So how does Velocity compare to Composite, which I believe is Cisco's data virtualization? What are the main differences in approach?
I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not too familiar with Composite as a data virtualization technology. Let me take a stab though in one of the areas we believe that Velocity is reasonably unique. In that a lot of data virtualization technologies actually seek to solve a storage problem. So they seek to solve problems for either a storage administrator or somebody who is performing storage-related tasks. And so there are lots of technologies out there for that that seek to solve those problems. They're automating storage routines. The likes of Viper and NetApp have automation suites. So that's fine because you're solving for the storage problem. But data access actually involves more than just storage. There are database administration tasks. There are often backup and recovery administration tasks. There are all sorts of other tasks which need to be automated, and that completes the data access request. And so where we believe Velocity actually is reasonably unique is that we're serving the end-to-end value determined by the end user of the application, the Anthonys, right? The guys who want the data. They don't care whether it's storage, backup, admin, or whatever else. They just care for access. And so we want to automate and provide a workflow which gets that person to his data in a seamless manner under his own steam. We don't want to solve part of the problem and have to then pass it over and then be part of a bigger solution set. We'd like to automate that workflow end to end. So hopefully that gives you a flavor for what we're aiming for, and hence the reason for getting the right kind of people involved who can tell us what an end-to-end looks like so that we can tweak the workflow and make it work for any given environment.
Excellent. Another question, I think I know the answer, but I'll let you guys answer it, is Velocity is not open source, is it?
Velocity is not open source, that is correct.
Okay. And is there any sort of trial, usually the follow-up to that, is there any sort of trial or free version people can use?
So the version here that we're actually offering, the early adopter, is free. We're actually restricting access, not because we want to restrict people who use it, but because we want to get to know the people who use it and understand how they want to deploy it. So the early adopter program is there'll be a no-cost application involved, in that we're not planning on charging any money whatsoever. We just want time and conversations with the people involved. So in that respect, early adopter is entirely in that realm, yeah.
Excellent. Next. Oh, here's another compare question. How does this compare with Delphix, which has had the same data virtualization solution in the market?
Yeah, so Delphix actually...
No, go ahead.
So, no, thank you. So Delphix is one of the applications or the solutions I was alluding to earlier. Then remember the 90 and 10%? So the 10% who are doing something smart, they're probably using something like a Delphix. And Delphix actually provides a very similar set of values in that it takes databases and it allows people to provision their own copies. Where Velocity, again, is trying to be different is we're trying to make use of copies of data you already have in your organization. And so we're not asking necessarily for you to give us additional copies into Velocity, although that is a way you can do it, and it works in the same way as Delphix, from that 10,000-foot view. But if you're using NetBackup, for example, we can make better use of a copy of data you already have in that backup silo. You're already keeping it and storing it for recovery. Why wouldn't you make better use of that data and use it for access as well? And so where Velocity differs is in the reuse of information that you're already storing for other purposes, and providing a no-risk ability to use that data for, in this case, application development.
Yep, agreed. I don't see another question here from the audience. I mean, those are pretty great. So let me ask a question, though, Alex, and more from having been in sort of your shoes over the years. This is a new offering from Veritas and aimed at the quote-unquote DevOps market. We're out here on the webinar and we've done this, but are there any materials or anything from Veritas that people might be able to download to get more information?
Yeah, we can actually, so externally there aren't any materials available, and that's simply because the product hasn't GA'd yet. It's a pre-release, and so we got an early glimpse of it, if you like. Again, if people want to email us, I promise you, we're not going to spam you. We're just interested in the conversation. If you would like to know more and simply know more, and that is all, email us and we'll get you the information. We'll be happy to share information with you. We just want to start the conversation. And so don't worry about, you're not going to get hit with a million sales calls. We're not planning on doing that. We just want to have conversations with people, like-minded people who have these problems. So publicly, no, but email us. We'd be happy to provide that information.
Got it. What about, another question came in, is Velocity a plug-in for the 5230 appliance?
It is not, no. So Velocity is a dedicated appliance, in quotes, so whether that's a virtual or physical appliance. And so it can sit alongside the 52 series or 53 series appliances, net backup appliances, but the physical appliance form factor is actually a 7330. So it's its own appliance form factor, built from the ground up for Velocity stresses and strains.
Excellent. Next question. What is the maximum size of database that works, and how much time does it take to spin up a new VM with a 1 terabyte Oracle database?
I can't answer that. The reason is I think we're still early on here. We don't actually have a lot of the performance statistics that I can kind of share here, in that there's still a huge amount of work going on to get performance where it needs to be. What I will say is that if someone wants to get in touch with us and discuss those needs around like average database sizes, requirements around access times, they're the kind of benchmarks we'd love to hear about, because I'd like to use that data as guideposts for our engineers to say, we have customers here who are interested, they would like this to work in this manner, using these metrics. And so if anyone's got those kind of desires about how they would like the solution to look, then that's exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. And again, it doesn't cost anything. It's just an easy throwaway comment for you. So I can't answer the question because we don't have it, but I'd love to have the conversation with somebody who can help us decide what an average environment and average database size looks like.
Great. Well, we're getting more. Would Velocity be considered for use in DR?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd always like to have that conversation with that person and say, what do you think? because I actually think, yeah, why not? I don't see why velocity can't be expanded out to DR and HA use cases, because ultimately access is in the eyes of the holder, right? So in this case, access we've been discussing is very much in the eyes of the application developer, so Anthony and his team. But there's no reason why that person can't be in business continuity or can't be a backup guy, because simply it's just access. It's access for recovery, access for availability. So the answer, I believe, is yes. Again, I'd love to hear more about the use cases that people desire this to be used in those use cases so that we can add that to our list of capabilities.
Excellent. Looks like we might, that's it. Okay, I think we've gotten to all the questions, and if that's so, guys, I think this was a great webinar, a great early look at velocity. Did you make it clear when this is available and all of that kind of good stuff, guys?
Do you know what? I didn't do that. No, thank you for catching that. So the early adopter program is available right now. That's part of the reason we're here. We'd love to talk to anyone right now who is interested in adopting. We can get you going very quickly on that because we're ready. Again, production ready code is just in early adopter status. What we're aiming for is to get this product ready for GA towards the end of this calendar year. So you can expect some more announcements to become externally available, including collateral, towards the end of the year. But right now, we're in production quality code, but we're in the early adopter phase.
Got it. And just, you've got your Team Velocity at Veritas web email address there so people can access that. With that being said then, let's take a wrap on this one. Alex and Anthony, great job on presenting velocity. Many thanks to Veritas for hosting today's webinar. To those of you who joined us live, thank you very much. To those of you who may be listening to this at a future date, a taped version, thank you, and those emails still work so you can send questions there. Until our next webinar, this is Alan Schimmel of DevOps.com, thanking you for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.